Hi, I'm Jeff Van Gundy, and you're listening to Thunder Bus.
Welcome to Thunder Bus with your hosts, Watson and Bones.
I'm Watson.
And I'm Bones.
We get serious about the Thunder on this podcast.
But we don't get too serious.
Bones, joining us on the bus today is Eric Montross. Eric was an All-American and an NCAA champion at North Carolina before being drafted 9th overall in 1994 and spending 8 seasons in the NBA. Today, he is the color commentator for UNC basketball. Eric, welcome on the bus.
Yeah, man, thank you so much. I look forward to this, and I know you guys do a great job. And we just off air talked about the fact that you're full of Tar Heels these days. With a couple months ago, Jerry Stackhouse being on there, and even in the off season, you're still pulling us in. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, well, if all else fails with the Thunder, we'll just shift over to North Carolina basketball podcast.
Exactly.
The two histories are pretty comparable, you know. So
exactly.
Speaking of that history, you played for Dean Smith and you've covered Roy Williams. What makes them such great coaches, and what are some big differences between them?
You know, it's a great question, and it's one that I have posed to me, over the years, probably several times, and yet I think that I still struggle to find the perfect answer. I think that there are many similarities. Coach Williams talks about the fact that Coach Smith told him to steal everything and then also make things your own. And so he's done that. You see the fast break style of play. You see the intense defense. You see with Coach Smith a real preference for post play. Now the game has changed since Coach Smith was coaching, and the way it is now, you have less back-to-the-basket post players, which, of course, I'm familiar with because I was one of them. But you also notice that they both have great work ethics, and they're both dedicated to not only their coaching staff but to their players. And I think that's the thing that allows us as players to trust in their preparation and really want to play for them. And I think it may not sound like that's a lot to say, but when you actually look at it a little more, you see that there are some players, whether it be at the college or the pro level or even high school level, who yearn to play for their head coach and yearn to play at the highest level because they don't want to come in subpar for them. They don't want to disappoint them. And that's what I think that these coaches have done is they've taken an ability to coach, an ability to communicate with their players over the years, and they've driven their program into a national spotlight and have had great successes.
You mentioned about the work ethic, and something that I've been curious about for a while as just a fan of the game is how much do coaches work? Like, is it something that you could do like 45 hours a week, or are all these guys putting in like 65, 70 hours every week? Do you have much insight on that?
I would say that it's definitely on the north of 45. I think that, as they say, if you own a business or you're a head coach, your light switch is never off. And so even when you're away from the program, out of the office, you're always thinking about ways to improve. You're always thinking about your staff. You're always thinking, in the case of college kids, you're always thinking about developing young men into grown-ups. And you're talking about developing student athletes. And so, and you're also always looking for the recruiting process. I mean, I think one of the most brutal aspects of college coaching is the recruiting process because it just doesn't stop. And that makes it a lot of fun to follow. But at the same time, for the head coach, there is not ever a time when your switch goes to off.
So obviously, Duke-Carolina is a special rivalry. In fact, you famously had your face cut open during a close win against Duke. Can you talk about what makes that rivalry so intense?
People will say it's proximity. People will say different things, the fans, but the bottom line is that we've been really lucky over the years to have Hall of Fame coaches at both schools. And when you have Hall of Fame coaches at both schools and the schools represent, I mean, as much as people, I even love to say, yeah, I hate Duke. Well, you really love the fact that they're so close. You love the fact that they're competing on the same level as we are. You love that they're competing for the same recruits. You love that they're competing for the same coaching staff. You know, you're just looking at all the similarities, and when you're at a high level, you go for it together and against each other. And so there's never, we just talk about head coaches and how there's never really a time off for them. There's never a time off for this rivalry because this level of intensity extends throughout the year. It's just that it's only highlighted on a national scope a couple times a year.
Interesting. What's it like to play in Cameron Indoor?
You know, people also have asked me over the years, what's your favorite venue? And I tell them, you know, the Smith Center, the Boston Garden, and Cameron, because all of those places, for me, the Smith Center was home, of course. For me, the old Boston Garden was home for me. And then Cameron had so many incredibly rich memories. Those are not just memories of wins, which are obviously you'd like to say are the richest, but also they're the most emotionally bound. And so I think for a lot of, whether you're a coach, a player, or a fan, or a reporter, what you find is that you remember the things that are most emotionally binding to you. And so in those cases, you walk into Cameron as a player and you know that you're expecting an exceptional environment. Those environments are not easy to replicate. Michigan State does a nice job with Coach Izzo and obviously Kansas. I've never been in to Allen Fieldhouse to watch Kansas at home, but you can really tell even on TV how it must convey to a fan. But the intensity inside of there and how close everyone is just a lot of fun.
Can you tell us what the feeling was like when you walked on the floor in the national championship game, knowing that you were about to play for a championship?
I wish that I had journaled when I was in school because you know, now at age 48, I wish that I could remember every single drip of emotion. What I do remember is that, and it's interesting because you would think that I would even think that there would be all of these snapshots, just like a slideshow of moments of what's it like walking out of the locker room? What's it like walking onto the court? What's it like during intros? How are you standing? What did you feel? What were the fans doing? But I'll be honest with you, the focus that we had, and I say we, I don't for a minute think it was just me, but the focus that we had as a team, I don't remember what it was like to leave the locker room. I don't remember crossing onto the court. I don't remember what it was like in introductions. I just remember staring at the maize and blue jerseys, and that was my focus from tip-off to the final whistle. I do remember distinctly standing at midcourt, and there are even some photographs of this that help me remember, of Donald Williams when he's shooting the foul shots at the very end of the game after the timeout. And I remember having my hands straight up in the air. I remember that sensation, and I don't know exactly if I just knew that felt like the final straw. But to me, that was really the only thing I remembered from the locker room till the end of the game.
So we're going to cut to some of the hard-hitting questions. You survived getting punched by Shaq. What led to that, and how bad did it hurt?
Hard-hitting questions.
Well, there's a pretty good. No. This is actually, there's a great answer to this. That was actually in a back-to-back home games with Orlando. And I believe that Shaquille had not scored in the first half. I think we were playing in Portland. And it was considered a home game for us, but an off-venue home game. maybe the circus was in town, or who knows, in the Boston Garden. But I remember, I loved playing against the best players, and he was certainly one of the best. And I remember that, you play physically. I always had played physically. He played physically. And we got tangled up underneath the basket on a rebound. And he came at me with an open hand. And I remember, obviously, back then it was just when people were really starting to get fined for throwing punches in the NBA. And so it was an open hand, not a fist. And he did it in the neck, and I'll be honest with you, I don't remember a moment of thinking, oh my gosh, my neck is broken. Nothing like that. I don't remember any of that. I just remember taking a step back, and then Sherman Douglas, who was Syracuse guard on my team, point guard for us, gets behind O'Neal, gets down on all fours, and O'Neal topples over backwards. So, and then he gets fined $75,000 to boot. So, to me, it was the perfect ending to a perfect story.
Shaq got tabletopped.
What's it like to guard Shaq?
You can't ever take a possession off. He was such an incredible athlete. And when you have someone that has that athleticism and the ability to accelerate off the floor at that size, and the ability, the width, so you're always fighting not just strength and size. We're the same height, but he had about 60 pounds on me. I mean, I was 290, and I guarantee you he was nothing short of 350. And then his ability to jump and his hands. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, I loved playing against him. I loved playing against Olajuwon. I loved playing against Ewing. I loved playing against David Robinson, Karl Malone, Sean Kemp, all those guys who were the best of the best. And that, to me, is what the NBA is about. It's the ability to play against the very best night in and night out. And I loved it.
What was your strategy when you were guarding him? Were you trying to just keep him from getting the ball, or were you just trying to make sure if he got the ball that you were forcing him from the basket on the catch, or what was your thinking there?
He wasn't a focus of their offense at all. So, really it's just about trying to keep him from getting the ball, trying to keep him from getting position to get the ball. And, you're not going to do that successfully. There are a lot of players, and I just mentioned a handful of them, all of which are in the NBA's top 50 or the 50 greatest of all time. Those guys, you don't stop. We've all heard the old adage, you can just hope to contain them. But really, you just want to force them to take a shot that's contested. They're going to make them. They're going to miss a few. You just want to be able to be in position to make them look over the top of you when they shoot. And that was, and prevent them from catching it really deep. And because for any of those guys, not just O'Neal, but for any of them, you give them the ball on the block and it's night-night for everybody. So it's just, there's never a possession that you can really relax. But again, that's part of the intensity and the fun of the game of basketball.
Eric, do you have any good Scott Pollard stories?
Wow! Now you talk about coming out of left field. you got to share with me where that one came from.
I mean, you were teammates with him, and he's got kind of a reputation for being kind of a crazy guy. He has the crazy hairstyles. Maybe it's just the hairstyles given the reputation. Maybe he's reading Plato and playing Go in his spare time. I have no idea. He's just famous for the hairstyle. So,
well, and when he came to Detroit as a rookie out of Kansas, he didn't have all of that. It was just Scott, and Scott was a good guy. I didn't play with him all that long, but it was. Maybe that was the effect I had on him. Maybe I drove him nuts, and that's why. But he was. I remember having dinner with he and his wife. My wife and I did, and just talking about being a rookie in the league and just kind of how that ebbs and flows. But I enjoyed Scott, and that's definitely a name from the past.
What can you tell us about playing with Dell Curry?
Dell was fantastic. Just an incredible pro, not just for his successes as a player, but he was an awesome teammate. I mean, you talk about somebody that was funny. He had jokes. He had a quick wit. He had the ability to dial it in and focus when it counted. But he was a wonderful teammate. Someone who I truly enjoyed being on the same team with. And it was interesting because both of his boys were ball boys for the Raptors. And looking back on it, it's easy. Hindsight's always 20/20. You look back and you're on a team with Vince Carter, but what do you remember? You remember these kids coming in launching NBA pro three-pointers at ages 10 and 12 or less than that. But they were ball kids for us, and it's been fun to watch his family, and I know that he's very proud of them. But he was an awesome teammate.
So you mentioned Vince Carter, and he just retired. Can you reflect a little on his career and what he was like as a teammate and a person?
Yeah, well, Vince, the thing about Vince, it was almost more fun to watch him in practice because that's when he would try the things that he was going to see if he could do. And then if he did it well enough in practice, he'd do it in a game. So, that was just so much fun to be around him. Obviously, at that point in time, he was in absolutely heyday for his athleticism and his ability to command not just defensive presence, but just how the game flowed around him. And Toronto loved him, and Toronto's fans were some of the best in the NBA even then. And Toronto was not a great team at that time. And we had made the playoffs, made the second round of the playoffs. One year, lost to Philly in Game 7. And that was the year that Vince went to graduation and came in just before the game. And, it was one of those great moments for student athletes, and nobody picked up on it. Everybody just wanted to give him a heckle because he actually attended graduation at Carolina. But Vince was a wonderful teammate. And again, there was so much fun just watching his game develop as a young player.
One thing that he did well is he transitioned from being a top flight star to being a role player over the course of his career. And you made a somewhat similar transition, going from being an All-American to starting every game in the NBA and then coming off the bench towards the latter half of your career. What was that transition like, and how do you change your mental state from, you've always been a star to becoming a role player for the first time in your life in the NBA?
Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest things that players have to do. And I think that you can explain it pretty succinctly and easily as you did. But what that is devoid of the emotion. And I think that, when you're used to having having a chance to affect every possession, and then you go to watching a lot of the possessions in a game, or when you're not in for the most important possessions, that's a tough transition. And, I think that it was hard. For me, it was hard. I'm sure it was hard for Vince, but I tell you, Vince went from superstar to role player and still always maintained a significant presence. But, I think that's one of the things that I really admire. I mean, the love for the game is what you rely on at that point. And you enjoy being a part of it. The emotion is still there. Obviously it's not the same when you're on the court versus on the bench watching, but you're still in an elite crowd of players, and you're still having an opportunity to do something that you love.
So over the course of your career, you played with guys like Iverson, Jason Kidd, Grant Hill, Joe Dumars, and obviously Jerry Stackhouse. Who's the best player you ever played with?
The best player I ever played against. Well, I guess you're asking me best player I played with. I played with Olajuwon in Toronto, and I think that even though he was at the tail end of his career, he was such a magnificent player that it's hard for me not to put him at the top. I also really respected him as a man, and so being able to, be in the locker room, be on the bus, be a front court player that played against him every day in practice and subbed for him in the games. Those were I really enjoyed being around Olajuwon. And but you're right. All the guys that you mentioned are guys that I feel fortunate for playing against. Jason Kidd, Jamal Mashburn, played with him when he was in Dallas along with Jason. Those guys were elite players as well.
How do you prepare for a game as a color commentator? Do you have to scout the opposing team and make notes? Is there support staff in your ear, like producers, stat guys? And just kind of pull back the curtain a little bit.
Yeah, it's very different set of emotions, very different approach to the game. And that's a good thing. I mean, as a player, everything hinges on the moment. As a commentator, and certainly you're preparing as a player, as a commentator, you're also preparing for the team. You're preparing for what's going to happen in a game. You try and identify trends. But for me, as the color commentator, I'm focusing on in-game happening right now. And so you have to have a balance between understanding how a team, how an individual has performed, and what's happening right now. And those are things that I really enjoy. It's been fun also to be able to be around the best programs in the country, be it Carolina or be it going over to Duke and playing them. Being on the road in the ACC gives all kinds of opportunities to watch great players and great competition. So, the game of basketball has been very good to me, and I've just enjoyed being able to live and be a part of it.
How do you train to speak well on a broadcast? Is that something that comes naturally to you? And how much does it bug you if you make like a verbal foible on the air?
Well, Jones Angel, who does a magnificent job doing our play-by-play, and I laugh at each other whenever we make a mistake, because on live broadcasts, I mean, you guys know you're going to make mistakes, and that's part of what you got to be okay with. And but I think it also is just being comfortable that you're not going to get everything right, but you're going to do the best you can. And that sounds a little cliche, but the fact of the matter is that's what all of us try to do.
Do you think that basketball is giving up on kind of the classic big 7-footer like yourself? Think basketball is kind of giving up on that role too quickly?
I think I would love to see back to the basket post play as a part of the game, but things change, and I still think that there is room for that. I just think you have to find the player who wants to play that way, and these days that's hard to find. You just don't find a lot of guys that crave for that style, and it's just because it's not seen very often. But to me, it's still a very viable way to play. It's just not one that's chosen, and it's not one that players really try to adapt to or learn how to do it anymore.
What do you see as the future of the post-up?
Well, I think a little bit like the last answer, that it's constantly evolving. I mean, I think there will always – the thing about the NBA is if you got somebody that can score, regardless of how they do it, coaches will find a way to utilize that ability because they want to win. And so I think that post-play will have to be like the old school Patrick Ewing, O'Neal, Olajuwon kind of a post-game will have to be left for the really, really good players who come in and are so good at that their team has to adapt to their style of play. There's not enough of it right now to make it a style, but I can tell you that the league craves scorers, and they crave players that sell seats and sell jerseys and command TV time. And so it will take that special kind of player to come in and present that to see it much anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you talk a little bit about what an honor it was to have your jersey retired at North Carolina?
Well, I mean, that's one of the great honors from a basketball player, to have your university or college honor your jersey. I mean, when I look up and look into our rafters and see the names of the guys that are there, I think that's when the honor hits you. And, the front row of 7 jerseys are the retired players, retired jerseys. And then there are a host of us that have honored jerseys. But when you play for Coach Smith, when you play at Carolina, you are a family. And that's an overused term, and a lot of people are playing off of it. But for those of us who played there and know that and felt that, that's why we want to be there, because we want to be in the rafters to say, this is what it was like to play in this place and at this place and for this university. It was an honor, and it's an honor to be honored by that university.
Eric, you co-founded an organization called Vaccine Ambassadors. Can you tell our listeners about the organization and its mission? Yeah,
of course. Really fortunate to be around some really good people. Had a long-time relationship with a gentleman named Dr. Jake Lohr. Jake is getting ready to turn 80. He lives in Tallahassee, Florida. He was a pediatrician at Carolina for many, many years before retiring down into northern Florida. And then a woman who's an RN named Jackie Kaufman. And Jackie and Jake and I had long worked within the hospital volunteering for kids, just to go in and hang out. And they recognized me. I mean, heck, I had to duck to get through the door. So they had no choice but to laugh at somebody that had to do that. So I had a lot of great experiences, trying to brighten kids' days who happened to like basketball. But then also met a lot of great folks within the medical industry, and Jake and Jackie are 2 of those. What Vaccine Ambassadors does is, and I would encourage, anytime now it's so easy to go online to vaccineambassadors.org, but Vaccine Ambassadors, we seek to vaccinate children in vulnerable populations worldwide. We're growing into that realm. We are a nonprofit. We have hardly any overhead. We're really transparent in where the costs go. We've partnered with the Pan American Health Organization, and right now the majority of our work is happening in Haiti and in Venezuela. And we purchase vaccines at a really great rate, and then we're able to let the Pan American Health Organization deliver them, and that helps make it the most efficient in a situation when you don't always know how you're going to get vaccines there. You need to partner with organizations who do it every day, and so we've doled out hundreds of thousands of vaccines, and they're life-saving. And for a lot of kids, especially in third world countries, they die without them. And of course, vaccines are obviously on the top of the news every day now for us during this global pandemic, and people are yearning for a vaccine for COVID-19. But the everyday vaccinations for measles, mumps, rubella, all of the things that we take for granted, folks in these third world countries don't take for granted, and they can kill you just as quickly. So just been terribly proud of that organization and what we're doing with it. So thank you for asking and giving me an opportunity to talk about it. Again, it's just vaccineambassadors.org, and hope folks would go online and just check it out. We're real proud of it, and you can't help but put a plug in for folks who want to drop a quarter and buy a vaccine for a kid. That's really what the cost is. You'll see everything transparent on there. We'd love to have folks contribute if they're able. I know that right now is a very challenging financial time for a lot of folks, but there are still needs. And if any of your listeners are folks who have the capacity to give even what they may consider modest, it saves lives, plain and simple.
Well, that's awesome. I speaking for myself, I'm extremely grateful that that you're doing that. It's making the world a better place.
Well, thank you.
Well, that's the last stop on the bus today. Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Guys, really enjoyed it. Thanks for making me a part of your show, and we'll look forward to next time.
You can follow Eric on Twitter at Eric Montross. You can follow us on Twitter at Thunder_Bus_pod, and we're on all the major podcast apps. Until next time, thanks for riding the bus this week, and Thunder up.